Your phone is dead, and so is your whole street. You hold the black screen up to the window, jaw slack, waiting for a signal that isn't coming. 2 days in, your ice is soup, and you can't boil a pot of water. 12 miles away, an Amish family hasn't noticed a thing is wrong. A girl in a plain dress is canning venison by lamplight, her hands moving from memory. He's Amish, dry as a barn board, and he keeps noticing how loud your world is even when it's off. You didn't lose a skill, he says. You rented it out. Every job your great-grandparents did by hand, you handed to a company you've never met. So here's the real question. What do the Amish know about living without power that the rest of us forgot? Not stockpiling gear in a bunker, plain, boring knowledge, retired one convenience at a time. Stick around and you'll see exactly which of their skills map onto a modern blackout. By the end, off the grid won't sound scary. It'll sound like your grandparents' Tuesday. The rule everyone gets wrong. You look at an Amish family and see a quaint choice. No electricity, no cars, plain clothes, a custom, like avoiding the color orange. That's the story most people tell, and it's a little insulting when you think about it. Here's the sharper version. The Amish aren't rejecting technology because a switch is evil. They're asking whether a thing pulls the community together or scatters it apart. The rule isn't the quirk. The rule is a fence around the whole group. And if you think that fence is holding people back, look at the numbers. The Young Center for Anabaptist and Pietist Studies over at Elizabethtown College in Pennsylvania has counted this carefully. Around 1900, roughly 8,000 Old Order Amish lived in North America. By 2023, that same community had passed 370,000. Read that again. They're one of the fastest growing groups in the entire United States. And they did it while turning down the electric company. Every backward family you picture is quietly doubling every 20 years or so. That's not a dying custom. That's a strategy that works embarrassingly well. Picture the contrast on any Ohio backroad. A buggy rolls along at 8 miles an hour, and a pickup blows past blasting a podcast about productivity. One of those two households is out-reproducing the other by a wide margin, and it isn't the truck. So the simple custom is actually a rule, and the rule is doing something. It's keeping families close enough that the group keeps growing, which raises the obvious question. If they let a phone in the barn but not the house, and a tractor in the field but not the road, who exactly decides where that fence goes? Because someone is drawing these lines, and the lines are weirdly specific. And that brings us to the quiet machinery running every settlement. Chapter 2. You pull into a gas station and a buggy is parked beside your car. You probably think the horse and buggy thing is just a quaint Amish quirk, a vibe, something they kept because Grandpa liked it. But that's the wrong lens entirely. The buggy isn't nostalgia. It's a rule the whole community agreed to keep. And the rule has a job. The job is holding people close together. A car lets you drive 40 miles to a different church, a different life, a different you. A horse keeps you within a few miles of the same neighbors your whole life. So the line isn't drawn against speed, it's drawn against drifting apart. Once you see it that way, the backwardness stops looking backward. It looks like a decision. And here's where it gets genuinely strange. You'd assume a group that turned down grid power would be poor, small, and slowly fading. The opposite is true. Holmes County, Ohio, is the largest single Amish settlement on Earth, roughly 35,000 people, running hundreds of small businesses with zero grid electricity. Furniture shops, machine shops, bakeries, all humming along without a single wire from the pole. The people who rejected progress are out-earning half their wired neighbors. Read that again. Meanwhile, you buy a hand-crank radio for your emergency kit, feeling very prepared. Somewhere in Holmes County, a farmer glances up from the crank generator he's cranked since 1985, nods once, and goes back to work. So the buggy passes your idling car at the stoplight, engine off, no fuel gauge, no monthly payment. You're the one burning gas to sit still. He's just going home, the same way, to the same road, on purpose, which raises the obvious question. If the community can agree to keep a horse and refuse a wire, who actually casts that vote? There's no pope, no headquarters, no rule book you can order online. The decision comes from somewhere much smaller and much stranger, and that machinery is Chapter 3. So isn't Chapter 3 just some quaint Amish rule about buggies and beards? That's the assumption, and it's wrong in a way worth slowing down for. You probably picture a custom, a habit passed down, followed because Grandpa did it. That's the myth, and it's half right. But Chapter 3 isn't a habit. It's a rule the whole community votes on, tests, and enforces with an actual purpose underneath the black hats. The sharper truth is this: every restriction is a decision about what a machine does to a community, not to a person. Does a phone in the house pull people apart at dinner? Then it lives in a shed by the road. The rule protects the group, and the group keeps the rule alive. It's less old-fashioned and more unusually stubborn about consequences. And here's the part that annoys efficiency experts. Amish farmers in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, routinely pull crop yields that match their neighbors. The ones running diesel tractors and buying synthetic fertilizer by the truckload, using horse-drawn equipment and manure. No purchased synthetic inputs. Sit with that. A guy behind a team of horses is keeping pace with a satellite-guided combine. Not because he refuses progress out of spite, but because the community decided the tractor's costs weren't worth its speed. They ran the math with their feet. You can watch it happen on any two-lane road out there. A buggy clops along at 8 miles an hour while a line of cars stacks up behind it, engines snarling, someone leaning on a horn. The buggy does not care, and this is where the running joke basically writes itself. You buy a cast iron skillet, season it, feel clever about your ancestral cooking wisdom, and somewhere an Amish farmer glances up from the one he's used for 40 years, nods once, and goes back to work. So if the community decides everything by voting, who exactly gets a vote, and what happens to the people who lose? That machinery of belonging and banishment is Chapter 4. So the vote decides who belongs, but that's not the strange part. The strange part is what belonging quietly requires of you every single day. You probably picture the rules as charming little quirks. No buttons, no zippers, a buggy instead of a car. Cute, harmless, a bit stubborn. But each rule is a community decision doing a job, not a random hangover from the past. The Amish call this shared agreement the Ordnung, and it covers everything from hemlines to hay. Take the way an Amish family keeps food. You might assume they simply refuse fridges to prove a point. The point isn't the refusing, it's the working alternative underneath it. Root cellaring, central to Amish households, keeps root vegetables edible for 6 to 8 months at temperatures between 32 and 40 degrees, with no refrigeration at all. 6 to 8 months. That's a dugout room under the house doing the job of a machine silently for half a year. Carrots, potatoes, beets, turnips, all sitting patiently in the cool dark while the rest of us discover our fridge died overnight. The mechanism is boring dirt and steady cold. The result is a family that eats through winter without a wire to the wall. Now picture a homesteading influencer online, breathlessly unveiling his brilliant new root cellar hack to 40,000 viewers. Somewhere in Lancaster County, an Amish farmer glances up from the potatoes he's been storing this exact way for 40 years, nods once and goes back to work. He says nothing. He has beets to bury. A buggy rolls past a gas station, unbothered, while a truck idles and honks behind it. The truck is in a hurry. The buggy has been doing this since before the truck existed. So the rules aren't quirks. They're a working system for staying alive together. But a system that tight raises an uncomfortable question. What happens to someone who breaks it? And how a community can love you and cut you off in the same breath, which is Chapter 5. The shunning thing. You probably picture it as a cruel little custom. A stern man in a black hat pointing you out the door. That's the movie version. The real mechanism is quieter and colder. Shunning is a community rule, not a temper tantrum. It kicks in only after you break a promise you made as an adult, on your knees in front of everyone. So it isn't about hating you. It's about the rule surviving, even when a person doesn't. And you can see why the rule matters once you understand how much these households actually carry each other. The USDA documented in a 2012 report that Amish families across the Midwest put up between 700 and 1,000 quart jars of food per household every year through water bath and pressure canning. That's a wall of glass jars in the cellar. Think about that number. 1,000 jars is not a hobby. It's a promise that nobody in the church district goes hungry through February. When the whole system runs on people keeping their word, a broken word isn't a small thing. It's a crack in the shelf that holds everyone up. So the shunning has teeth on purpose. You still get greeted, still get loved, but you eat at a separate table and nobody takes goods directly from your hand. It's love with a firewall. Brutal and tender at once. And honestly, the calm of it is the eerie part. A modern town would hold a meeting, form a committee, and buy a motivational banner. The Amish just quietly stop passing you the potatoes. Somewhere out on the road, a buggy rolls past a screaming line of traffic and the driver doesn't even glance over. He's heard louder. But here's the question that cracks the whole thing open. If breaking the rule costs you the table, the cellar, and half your family, why do so many of them stay anyway? And what exactly are they afraid of losing? Which is Chapter 6. Picture a horse-drawn buggy rolling past a stalled line of cars. You probably see that scene and think it's charming stubbornness, a quaint refusal to plug in, framed on a postcard somewhere. But the rule against the grid isn't nostalgia dressed up as faith. It's a community rule doing a specific job. The Amish aren't afraid of engines. They're afraid of dependence they can't fix themselves. And there's a difference. Here's the part that makes the postcard version fall apart. When the wires go dead, the horse still eats grass and the buggy still rolls. That independence isn't luck. It's engineered, tested, and older than most of the machines you trust. Take wood gasifiers. You burn wood in a sealed drum, and it puffs out a gas an engine can run on. Sounds like a doomsday forum fantasy. It isn't. FEMA documented that this exact technology powered over 1 million vehicles across Europe in the 1940s, when petroleum simply vanished during the war. 1 million. Cars, trucks, buses, all running on smoldering firewood because the fuel stations had nothing left to sell. The Amish and back-to-land folks kept that knowledge warm the whole time, not because they read the FEMA report, because they never stopped needing it. So when a survival channel unveils its clever wood gas generator like a magic trick, an Amish farmer glances up from the one he's run for 40 years, nods once and goes back to splitting logs. He's heard this pitch before. He was the pitch. That's the real shape of the rule. Every custom that looks like a quirk is actually a fallback that still works when the fancy version quits. The buggy doesn't need a charging station. It never did, which leaves one loose thread nobody explains on the postcards. If the technology scales this well and the independence is this deliberate, then why draw the line where they draw it? Why say yes to a gasifier and no to a phone line, which is Chapter 7? So isn't this just a quaint little custom, some charming rule about jars in a cellar? That's the easy read. You picture a folk habit passed down like a recipe, harmless and cute. But look closer. The rule isn't nostalgia. It's engineering wearing a bonnet. Here's the thing most people miss about Amish food storage. It looks like tradition, but it functions as a community rule with a purpose. Every household keeps enough to feed itself through a bad winter, and enough to lend to a neighbor whose harvest failed. The rule isn't grandma liked canning. The rule is nobody starves when the trucks stop. You'd expect the government to laugh this off. It did the opposite. A 1994 FEMA Emergency Preparedness Guide explicitly cited Amish food storage and water management practices as a model for community resilience during prolonged power outages. Sit with that. The Federal Disaster Agency, the people with satellites and helicopters, pointed at the folks in buggies and said, "Do it like them." Because when the grid dies for 2 weeks, a full root cellar beats a dead refrigerator every single time. And this is where the modern survival industry gets a little embarrassing. You can spend $400 on a solar-powered freeze-dried meal kit with a QR code on the bucket. Meanwhile, a farmer near Lancaster has 300 quarts of tomatoes in a stone cellar that stays cold without electricity. He glances up from the shelf he's been stocking since 1981, nods once, and goes back to sealing lids. No comment. The point is that the custom is a checkable system, not a vibe. It survives outages because it was built to, not because it's charming. Which raises the obvious follow-up, the one that ruins the postcard. If the food rule is this deliberate, and the water rule is this deliberate, then the technology rules must be deliberate too. So what exactly is the line? Why yes to a diesel generator and no to a smartphone? And who decides where that fence goes? Which is Chapter 8. So you'd expect Chapter 8 to be where the whole thing finally gets quaint. A charming little quirk you can put on a calendar. That's the myth. You picture an old rule handed down for no reason, kept out of stubbornness, like a hat nobody remembers buying. Something soft and sentimental. But the custom isn't a mood. It's a rule the whole community writes down and agrees to keep. The way you'd agree on which side of the road to drive. Each church district hammers out its own list, called the Ordnung, and votes on it twice a year. Nobody inherits it by accident. They choose it out loud together. And the choosing follows one plain question. Does this thing pull the family apart or hold it together? A tractor tempts you to drive to town and skip your neighbors. A hand pump keeps you home, at the same well, doing the same work your grandfather did. Which sounds sweet until you notice how well the pump actually works. A hand pump well of the kind bolted onto an Amish farm can pull water up from as deep as 200 feet and push out 5 gallons a minute, with no wire running to it anywhere. When the grid dies for 3 days and your whole street is boiling snow on a camp stove, that pump does not notice. It never noticed. Picture the storm that knocks out power across 4 counties. Your phone is a brick, your fridge is a warm box, your car is stuck at a dead pump, and a buggy rolls past your house unhurried because for that family, literally nothing changed. Same water. You hand your neighbor Eli a shiny new hand-crank emergency radio, still in the box. He glances up from the crank radio he's had since 1984, nods once, and goes back to work. So the line isn't about hating machines. It's about who each machine makes you depend on, which leaves the last, harder question. If they can vote a rule in, can they vote one back out? And what happens to the family who says no? So picture your dark kitchen again, the ice melting, that dead flashlight app. 12 miles away, the 14-year-old girl is still canning venison by lamplight. The difference between you isn't wealth or grit or some secret refusal of the modern world. It's that she learned the manual version first and only then reached for the switch. That's the whole thing. Skills come before conveniences, not the other way around. You handed yours to a company because it was easier, and easy is a fine trade, until the grid goes quiet. Nobody's asking you to churn your own butter tonight, but when the lights go out again, and they will, which of your everyday tasks do you actually know how to do by hand?